All right, we're going to try and get to the end of this chapter. I'm having a lot of fun with the reading today, so. The emissary stood, dead center in the throne room. Stood, not knelt. Gav could already tell this was not going to go anywhere near as well as the audience with Mayor Tyrwin. The man's velvet doublet, was practically molded to his chiseled physique. He could have used his cheekbones to cut marble, and his golden hair had an insolent wave that Gav suspected took his valet an hour to perfect in the morning. He stood like he owned the room and was considering redecorating. "Can I help you?" Gav said in his driest voice. He realized, as soon as the interloper turned and failed to meet his eyes, that he had misjudged the entrance. He had been going for the understatedness of unquestioned power. This buffoon didn't so much question as fail to notice. "You can't possibly expect me to keep waiting for your master," the emissary said, his gaze sweeping Gav once from head to foot and then dismissing him. "Excuse me," said Gav. The emissary failed to notice the danger in Gav's tone. "First, those disgusting little monsters." Gav could feel the goblin guards flanking him bristle, and felt a jolt of relief that they did have some pride, after all. "And then that eunuch of a major domo." Gav felt a sudden, surprising wave of sympathy for Sirico. "And now what are you? A clerk or something? Gods above, I'm going backwards." Gav narrowed his eyes. "And who exactly are you?" "Count Fiari, for all the good it's doing me," he said, sweeping his perfect bangs out of his eyes with a practiced gesture. "Sent to negotiate terms of Her Royal Highness the Princess Alicia's release. But apparently your master has something more urgent to do. Collecting hen's teeth? Consort with succubi, perhaps? You'd think after going to all the trouble of kidnapping the lady from her bed, he would show at least a bit of interest in completing the transaction. Or perhaps hearing what his majesty will do if he doesn't." "And what will his majesty do?" Gav was very interested in hearing. Fiari actually looked at him for a moment with withering scorn. "I'm sure you cannot wait to lord your advanced knowledge over the other servants in this dung-heap of a castle. But that is not how this works in a well-run household. Royal emissaries do not chat with underlings. Now stop wasting my time and go find that damn wizard of yours." Fiari turned and actually turned his back on him. After several days of creatures quivering in fear before him, Gav barely kept his jaw from hanging open. He could see in the corners of his eyes the goblins glancing to see how he would react. His cheeks grew hot. He glanced down and saw, instead of the usual black velvet, his oh-so-practical plain outfit. Suddenly his previous self's taste in garments started to make a lot more sense. He sucked in a breath and turned on his heel. All the way back to his chamber he replayed the conversation in his head, each time coming up with increasingly biting and witty rejoinders. His blood sang in his ears. A dung-heap of a castle? Disgusting little monsters? Well, he knew it wasn't a very impressive castle, and the goblins were rather disgusting, it was true. But they were his disgusting little monsters, and he would be damned if he was going to let the popinjay insult them. Or Sirico, who Gav didn't think was a eunuch, but it certainly wasn't Count Where's-My-Mirror's business if he was. He flung the door to his chamber open, drawing a dripping wet gear beetle to come scrabbling out of the bathroom, clutching a scrap of what looked like burlap around his waist. "The one with the flames," he barked. Gear beetle obeyed wordlessly, eyes huge. It was still a ridiculous garment, but it looked a lot less ridiculous with the snarl of rage on his face. He stalked back into the audience chamber, his heels hitting the flagstones of the passageway so hard that his teeth hurt. Treat him like a servant, would he? Look at him like he wasn't even worthy of ridicule. He had no memories to go with it, but the emotion, that feeling of impotent fury, resonated to the bone. He felt this way before. He'd sworn to do whatever it took to never feel this way again. He flung a hand out as he approached the door, blowing it off its hinges. It was unnecessary, but it felt good. Too late, he remembered the goblins on the other side. He'd have to check on them later. For now, his reckless willingness to expend resources would just underscore his point. He mentally drew lines up the inside of his forearms, tiny sparks of lightning curling up the paths he'd drawn. A cantrip, but a showy one. He strode through the wreckage before the dust could settle, and immediately stubbed his toe on the broken beams. He kept going, though, letting the grimace of pain twist his face, because why not? He was an evil overlord, and pain and rage were his bread and butter. It didn't matter whose. Count Fiari stood trembling in shock, his eyes wide, his floof of hair covered in sawdust. There was no recognition for the man that he had seen not 10 minutes earlier. He probably hadn't even registered Gav's face, or the fact that Gav had a face. Now Gav marched right up to him and looked him straight in the eye. "Kneel," he growled. Fiari dropped to his knees automatically. Gav stepped right around him, took the steps to the dais 2 at a time, and flung himself into his chair. Fiari turned himself around awkwardly on his knees. Gav hoped his hose tore. "You wanted my attention," Gav said, his voice pitched deep enough that it scratched at his throat. "Mind what you wish for. Why should that wish not be the last one that you receive?" He wasn't certain the statement actually made sense, when considered coldly, but it seemed to be having the effect that he wanted, and he certainly couldn't stop now. Fiari swallowed visibly. "Greetings to the dread Lord Gavarax from His Royal Majesty, King Barbino of Arentel, third of his name, defender of the true faith of the 6 gods, ruler of—" "Get on with it," Gav snarled. Fiari's hands were shaking by his side. It was so deeply satisfying, as if his rage were a thirst he thought that could not be quenched, and Fiari's fear were the lightest of iced wines. He could have drunk it in all day. He had to remind himself that he needed to know what Barbino was planning to keep from carrying it further. "His Majesty begs the return of his beloved youngest daughter. He offers 1/5 of the royal treasury." "Old news," he said, cutting Fiari off again. "Why send you in person to deliver this?" Fiari swallowed again, his breath coming in short little gasps. That was not all of the message, my lord." The "my lord" part, in all its trembling glory, was the sweetest yet. "And what is the rest of the message?" Fiari's eyes flicked back and forth around the room, begging for escape. He did not want to deliver the rest of the message. "Quickly, Fiari, I have more important things to do than wait upon your stuttering," Gav said, letting the volume of his voice rise slightly towards the end. He leaned forward as if to get up. "If you do not accept the terms, His Majesty will instead offer the reward to whoever can deliver his daughter and—" Fiari blurted out, the words tumbling over each other before he pulled up short. His mouth worked soundlessly. "And?" He drawled the word out lazily, fighting an urge to shake it out of him. Fiari swallowed. "And your head." Gav leaned back. "He will he?" He looked down on Fiari through half-lidded eyes. "Let them come." Fiari was nearly hyperventilating on the floor. Gav considered for a moment turning him over to Sirico. The steward had been so very disappointed at not being allowed anywhere near the princess. He would surely make up for it in creativity with this fop. But no, that's what Gavarax would have done. It would feel good, really good. But then doing what felt good was probably why he had nothing but incompetent junior employees and a half-starved village left. Gavarax's arrogance and insecurity was what had got him into this mess in the first place. He meant to be good today, he remembered, and while he was pretty sure he'd stepped well out of those boundaries, he hadn't actually done anything yet. He could still be smart about this. He was letting this pipsqueak rile him up. It was beneath his dignity, he reminded himself. He looked at the coward squirming on the floor. This was how Zarek Honar saw him. He shoved aside the unwanted pity. Focus. A hint of practicality struggled its way through the falling tide of anger. He needed Barbino not to jump straight to a bounty. He had no idea what heroes might be tempted by such a reward, and no idea if he could withstand them. There, that was the part he had been missing. So, no indulging his worst impulses, no matter how satisfying they might be. He would have to let the fool go bleating back to his master if he wanted to salvage anything from this day's resolution. Tell your master I will consider his offer, Gav amended with a studied negligence. Remove yourself from my sight. I will not be so generous again. Fiari scrambled to his feet, backing out towards the doorway as quickly as he could, clearly unwilling to turn his back on Gav. He promptly tripped on the shattered pieces of the door, scrambled back to his feet, and dove out of sight. Gav could hear the footsteps pounding down the hall. The rage was leaking back out of him. The edges of his vision had darkened, he realized. He hadn't even been aware before his peripheral vision came back that it had been gone. He let out a breath, deflating into his chair. His eye caught a hint of red at the door. Sirocco, no doubt. He didn't want to deal with the steward, but he didn't have a lot of choice, really. Something needed to be done about the doors, at least. How much of his annual budget went into fixing mistakes from his temper tantrums? He bet Sirocco would know. He'd be damned if he would ask. Well, he was probably damned anyway, and he probably should know. But he just didn't have the energy right now. Stop hovering, he called. Sirocco scuttled up the carpet to hover at his elbow instead. He refrained from rolling his eyes, mentally congratulating himself for the achievement. How much would it take to redecorate the castle? 1/5 of the royal treasury? That depends, my lord, Sirocco said with some surprise. On last year's taxes and how much the king wastes his money, I suppose. Are we going with the slime walls you've been thinking about, then? Gav briefly fantasized what it might be like to rule a real castle with proper lands instead of one squalid village. Real guards, not goblins in mishmashed helmets that blocked their eyes. And human cooks. New furniture. He could only hold onto the vision for a wistful moment before reality reasserted itself. Could he actually afford new furniture? Not just in the sense of gold, but in the sense of changing his image. He was beginning to understand what his past self, Gavarax, had been thinking. Maybe Gavarax had terrible taste, but maybe it had never been about his personal aesthetic at all. Good taste doesn't actually get you far in this line of work, does it? This disaster of an audience proved that. He glanced down at the tunic with its garish flames. I hate this thing, he confided, not really expecting Sirocco to understand. My lord? Respectable clothes don't equal respect. He wasn't going to get respect, he realized now, not from his peers and not from his enemies. Gavarax clearly hadn't been worthy of respect. One does need to dress for the role, Sirocco pointed out to Gav's surprise, and it did do quite nicely for inspiring fear. But will fear be enough? Gav blew out a breath. Tell me, Sirocco, how well do you think the castle would stand against a wave of questing heroes? Siroko's silence was more than enough. The goblins would be useless, except perhaps as something to trip over. They helped with the atmosphere, but more with the creepiness than genuine menace, and he had undermined that already with their clothing. The villagers no better, if they could be induced to fight for him at all. He'd have to shelter them in the castle if he wanted anyone left to sow crops next year, and then hope none of them tried to betray him. Fireballs were all well and good, but he'd need enough fuel to cast them. That would be what? Most of the forest on the hill behind the castle? Which meant, of course, no fuel and little game, making the winter that much harder for them all. It would be so much easier to just give her up, he said. He could even pretend that had been the goal all along. Yes, Sirocco said cautiously, although Zarakonar, Gav finished heavily. And while he feared paladins and questing wizards, he was truly terrified of Zarakonar. He leaned back into the embrace of the wooden succubi. They were still uncomfortable, rather dreadfully so, but apparently not purposeless. Did what he had just done count as evil? He hadn't actually hurt the man. Actually, the only real physical damage he'd done had been to his own doors. But he had frightened him badly, and without much thought. He hadn't even considered another action, he realized, just leapt straight into rage. Did that mean he was truly evil at heart? Or did the fact that he'd sent the emissary back without so much as a scratch mean he was redeemable? How much had been practicality to maintain his position, and how much had been just satisfying his own bruised feelings? Zarakonar didn't feel guilty after tormenting him, Gav was sure, so why did he feel a little queasy about humiliating Fiari now that the rage was no longer in control? Did the rage even belong to him, or was it entirely vestigial? Vestigial. I know that word, I know what it means, but I rarely have to say it, if ever. He remembered the sneer on Fiari's eminently punchable face and decided at least a little of the rage had been really truly his, and justified, and that Fiari deserved to be taken down a notch or 7. But that didn't mean that he deserved to die in agony, and Gav wasn't very comfortable with how close he had come to just murdering him by reflex. He didn't like the thought, and he didn't like thinking about it in the first place, and he was done with Fiari making him feel bad. He stood and headed for the doors. Send someone to clean this up. Yes, my lord, Sirocco paced along at his elbow. Waiting for more orders, or just hoping for gossip? Gav didn't feel much like indulging him. He noticed the steward was still holding the blasted bag. He probably wanted Gav to deal with it, because Gav had to do everything around here. Fine, give it here, he said, stretching out a hand. Sirocco handed it over a bit too quickly. What was in there? Did it smell? He could open it in his workshop, but then he'd need a way to air things out. If he checked now, he could hand it back and make it Sirocco's problem. Too few of his problems could be made Sirocco's problems. He shouldn't look a gift bag in the mouth. He opened the bag. Oh, well.